And just a quick show of hands, how many folks are familiar, I'm just trying to get a feel for the technical knowledge, with mesh technologies? Somewhat, a little bit? Okay. Well, this will definitely blow your mind, which is good. It's interesting. Do we have any folks with kids in the room? Anyone? Negative. All right, you guys are true geeks. But my daughter is now 4. She just had her party right before I came down to Brazil. And for me, it's really interesting being a father who had always been thinking in terms of like, how do I want the world to be? What do I want to do with myself? And what do I want the world to look like when I'm, dead and buried? And now I have a kid, and I'm thinking like, what's the world that I want her to inhabit? And she's grown up just with technology all around in every facet of her life. She's grown up natively, like playing with phones and playing on laptops and using all these devices. And as far as I can tell, there is no one in any school in the United States that's being taught about the downside, the detriments of what is quickly coming to be a universal panoptic surveillance environment for her. And so the work that I've been doing, I think, is really indicative of an opportunity, at least, to change the entire trajectory of communications and make it not one of top-down command and control and surveillance and monitoring and censorship, but rather one that can actually be owned and operated by the people, the participants in these networks. And so that's, in essence, what I'm going to be talking about. Kind of what is the kind of world that I want for my 4-year-old daughter when she grows up. And so I'm going to tell you about this project, this Commotion wireless project that I've done. But first, I thought it'd be fun to sort of descend into what I call the seedy underbelly of Washington, D.C., which is where I work every day. And it's interesting because I never thought I would end up in Washington, D.C. I'd come out of a movement in the late 1990s that was doing a lot of anti-GMO work against Monsanto, and then got involved in something called indie media. Are folks who's familiar with indie media? A couple of people. So this was like early generation radical media activists, people that were using the first generations of sort of digital cameras, the ones with the little floppy drive. You could take like 4 pictures and then you had to swap out and put in a new disc. And the early generation of like video recorders, we had mini disc recorders. Anyone remember those? It's like mini disc recorders and jazz drives, destined for the dust heaps of technology. But we were using those, and we were collecting all this information, going into all of these major protests and creating media. And in 1999 into 2000, this is an era where even under the best of circumstances, people would have internet connectivity via a dial-up modem, in essence. And from that, I got involved in this crazy idea of creating a community network that would allow us to not just document what was happening, but share that information. And I always stupidly, naively at the time, thought this was going to be a great summer project. I was in the summer of 2000. And from that work, as I'll explain in just a few minutes, got involved in building these things, climbing around on roofs, falling off of roofs, and got involved in spectrum policy. And that, for me, that was my gateway drug into Washington, D.C., was this notion of what we really need is to liberate the airwaves and to gain access to this resource that all of us own, but almost none of us have meaningful access to. And in 2007, the New America Foundation learned that I was moving from central Illinois, where I had been living, in Urbana, and headhunted me to come and work at the foundation and work on anything I wanted, which was sort of a deal. How could you turn that down? Work on anything you want and we'll pay you. And so I came there, and this is kind of the story of what happened after I got to D.C. And I'll say first and foremost, D.C. is this remarkable, strange place. Everyone's heard about it. Some people have probably watched House of Cards. It's not at all like that, except it's exactly like that. It's totally psychotic. It's a place actually full of people with amazingly strong personality and high ideals people that want to do a lot of good in the world. And they get to DC and they're all bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and they want to do wonderful things. And after about like 6 months or so, you can kind of see how these ideals, these grand visions start getting first sort of tempered, let's say. Like, instead of going for this, we're going to like do something a little bit less exciting. But then eventually these ideas get completely subjugated to sort of what we call political pragmatics, or the politics of compromise. And to me what DC is about, it's about how to take really wonderful people and turn them into cogs with vision that's blinkered like a horse and can't think outside of the box. And for the past 6 years I've run this institute, the Open Technology Institute, which for me was this bastion of sanity in what is often, as I can only describe as a totally inane place. And by that I mean, like, DC is full of think tanks. So one arm of our work was the traditional sort of policy intervention stuff, making white papers and articles and holding convenings and all of that. Except I didn't want to just do what everyone else was doing. I wanted to have sort of a bold, different kind of space. So this is the side of Open Technology Institute that kind of worked with members of Congress, senior White House officials, conducted kind of the research and analysis on a lot of today's pressing tech policy problems. But we also put inside this Open Technology Institute a field team, a group of folks that were working around the United States, but also internationally, deploying technologies, implementing technologies in these spaces, extracting information about what the everyday lives of people who are using these technologies looked like. And this became almost like a counter to the wildly inaccurate statements and assessments that would come out of all of the big tech companies, right? They would, they'd show to members of Congress these videos of like, shiny, happy, smiley people, everything is great, and you'd get on the ground and you'd be like, oh yeah, they, trucked in $100,000 worth of equipment, they set up the widget, they took this video, and then everything like basically collapsed after that. And that's kind of the way things work in DC. It's this simulacrum, it's this approximation of a utopian kind of ideal, but as soon as you scratch below the surface, you end up with something that is quite profoundly dystopian. And the third component of the work that I did was that we became a tech incubator. And so inside the Open Technology Institute, we have something called the Open Internet Tools Project. We invest a few $1 million a year in promising projects, especially around circumvention tech, anti-surveillance tech, things of that sort. But I've also created things like the Measurement Lab platform, which today is now the largest open repository of data on what's happening online. So when people want to know kind of what is actually happening in Iran with the halal net, or in China with all the censorship there, they use this data set. It's freely available to anyone that wants it. I think we're now closing in on about 1 petabyte of raw data, which is one hell of a large spreadsheet, as it were. And out of this team also came something called the Commotion Wireless Project, which is something that I've been running now for 14 years. But the interesting thing about OTI is it's all dealing in reaction to today's totally messed up political spaces, right? Bad things happen, shit rolls downhill, and we activate and we go and we try to prevent even worse things from happening. And this is epitomized in my mind by the whole SOPA PIPA battle. I was very involved in organizing the resistance to that getting passed. And it was at first tilting at windmills, right? We had no anticipation that we would actually win the battle to prevent SOPA PIPA from being passed. And obviously we did. We stopped it from getting passed. But we didn't move the ball forward. We just prevented bad things from coming to pass. And that tends to be the way that the public interest sector in DC works. And of course what happens in DC tends to reverberate globally. That's the sad reality of the decisions that are made there. And I'll tell you, most of the people that are making these decisions are not evil folks, they're not malfeasant, they're just unbelievably ignorant and naive to technological reality. So it's like it's stupidity, not evil. And into that space, an organization like this can do a lot of good, but it can only do so much in a reactive stance. And so what I wanted to create was not just this trifecta here of policy and tech and field, but something that would be looking ahead to the policy battles that were coming in 2018, 2020. Kind of the elite ninja geek force of the public interest sector. And that's why I created this X-Lab group, which is now officially 8 days old. The idea being to utilize all the resources that are in the Open Technology Institute, which has now grown to about 50 full-time staff. It's the largest technology outfit working in DC today. But what we need is something that's looking ahead. It's looking to a lot of the battles that are coming around smart grids and intelligent transportation, the unbelievably negative implications of how the Internet of Things is being operationalized today. I mean, I can't think of a more personally invasive business model than what is dominant in that industry. And there's no one holding the line and saying, we need to stop that from happening now. Because if we're fighting reactively in 2018 after everything, all your personal and private information has been commoditized, we've already lost the war. So this trifecta, and with this forward-leaning vanguard, it's kind of a strange bird in DC. It's unlike anything else, in fact, that exists there. And we're under constant pressure, in essence, to stop, to cease and desist doing a lot of what we do. I had a series of meetings with White House folks up through and including Obama's chief of staff, or I guess it was end of last year, talking about like the true implications for a lot of the Snowden revelations in terms of like, you just have to stop doing what you're doing. There's no other, like, there's no other option. Right? And that wasn't even on the table. To go into the White House and just say, stop, please stop doing this, was simply not on the table in these conversations. All the conversations were about what's the most marginal pivot we can make, the least things that we can do to make things so that people look elsewhere, that they stop, causing a kerfuffle over these issues. So, most people are familiar with the hub and spoke model. Anyone that has a cell phone knows about this model. It's the model whereby if you want to contact each other here in this room, you want to send a text message, you want to make a phone call, it's always through this central point. And that central point, of course, is where the seeing eye of Sauron is. It's exactly where you put all of your surveillance, your command and control. It's where you put your censorship. And pretty much all telecommunications is being routed through this business model. The internet as we know it today is rapidly being morphed and forced into this business model because it maximizes the billable moments on a network. You basically can't do anything without potentially being charged for that service. And this is going to get a lot worse, for sure. And the work that I've been doing with the Commotion project is about meshing different devices together. So after 14 years, it's about building open source, freely available software that interconnects the devices, for example, in your pockets and bags here in this room, directly to one another so that you don't have a central point. And as you can imagine, as you start networking these kinds of things together, as you start putting more and more devices into a network of this sort, as it grows organically, you create a larger and larger scale system whereby there's fewer and fewer points of individual failure, but also where surveillance and monitoring and billing become more and more difficult. And so, whereas the traditional model may maximize billable moments, this model is really about speed and effectiveness of communications. And it's a completely different notion of what the function of telecommunications should be. This is the model that is empowering, liberating to the users of the system, whereas the other one is really about a particular business extracting as many resources from the users, the participants in that system as possible. So Commotion is built out of everyday devices. This is a Pico station from a group called Ubiquity, but you can build it out of cell phones. You can build it out of the old WRT54G, the Linksys routers that pretty much everyone has seen. You can build it out of whatever happens to be available on the ground wherever it's being built. And this, of course, has huge implications when you're talking about resource-poor areas or places where it's very difficult to bring in specialized equipment. You really wouldn't want to show up with specialized equipment in a lot of the places where these systems may be deployed. Now, is anyone in this room not an owner of a cell phone? No one. So every single person has. Does anyone here have more than one cell phone? I'm definitely in that category. More than one cell phone. So I'll give you a quick example of just how completely technologically naive key decision makers in the United States are. The U.S. Supreme Court right now is looking at whether police need warrants to search cell phones. Right? So in essence, it's an open question right now in the United States whether to search your computer there needs to be some sort of judicial review of that. And one of the Supreme Court justices, one of the most powerful legal bodies, certainly in America, possibly on the planet, stated publicly that anyone with 2 cell phones is suspicious. And I'm like, oh great, we're finally going to get those bastards on Wall Street, because they've all got 8 cell phones tied to their bat belts. But no, of course, what he was thinking about is like drug dealers. And through that mindset, you can imagine how the actual reality on the ground of a zillion people having multiple devices for a lot of different reasons. A business phone and a personal phone. Multiple phones because you need multiple SIM cards because you travel a lot. You're debugging various programs across different platforms. All of that stuff. To the Supreme Court of the United States, that makes you suspicious. What we wanted to do is build something that could harness the power that was already in our community. And this is the earliest vision for Commotion that I could find. And you can see Sasha's house is down at the bottom there. And when I placed it next to the earliest version of ARPANET, the early internet, it looks eerily similar, just wireless instead of wireline. And what drove this was that Zach, up in the top left, he had a T1 connection into his basement. He was like a geek's geek and had routers, servers in his basement. This is 1999 and 2000 that we started talking about this. And what we wanted to do was use this to interconnect. This was over kind of a neighborhood, the different houses together so that we could access his server without going through our dial-up modem. And I don't know how clear that is, but if you look at the antennas there, they say Pringles on them, because at that point in time, in 2000, 2001, we were building the antennas out of Pringles cans, which in essence entailed having a bunch of people into my living room and force-feeding ourselves more Pringles. Like, I never want to eat a Pringles again. Like, hundreds of these cans over the course of 2 or 3 years. And today, of course, anyone can build this kind of infrastructure. By 2005, which is when this picture was taken, we were already building mesh networks at scale that we had been told just a couple of years prior were impossible. Right? It's not that it was difficult or a large lift or technologically complicated. Engineers, people in these spaces were telling us it was not possible to build an ad hoc, distributed, wireless mesh system of this scale. And the really awkward part is we would show some of these people, like these pictures. This is war driving, wandering around the town in our cars, just picking up the signal and seeing where we can connect and not to that network. we would show these pictures of the people that were telling us it's not possible to do this, and they would still argue it's not possible. And we'd be like, here's reality, here's your thought, we're giving you the counter-example to this. And this becomes very important because today when I do a lot of work in DC around unlicensed spectrum, liberating the airwaves, with regulatory bodies, and the Federal Communications Commission is prime amongst them, they say that the technologies that we want to empower are not possible. That what you declare that you want to be able to do, like I want to see an open GSM band so that all the chipsets and all these phones, all the devices people have in their pockets every day, have the opportunity to connect freely to one another, so that all of you have the opportunity to, for example, set up a cell tower here on your own and use the devices that are in your pockets. And the FCC says that's not possible. So by 2005, we'd built this kind of, this spans a few dozen blocks, deploying this completely unprecedented mesh technology. Stuff that had been pioneered in my living room mostly. I used to pay people with pizza and home-brewed beer, and that seemed to bring the geeks out. And we also determined that this was much larger than just what we were doing in our local community. This had to be something that was interconnecting with people all around the planet. And so in 2004, we had hosted the first International Summit for Community Wireless Networks. And this brought together hundreds of leaders of the open source community wireless movement for the first time for many of us, with the goal being to build the technology and to build community at the same time. And to me, what was really interesting is the people that showed up to this kind of a convening were a radically eclectic group. And so you had sort of like a lot of the radical media activist folks, you had a bunch of engineers and programmers and et cetera. You also had a bunch of artists, a lot of artists actually. And what started out as sort of this one kind of, or several different groups around the globe, it sort of started on the west coast of the United States. It came into sort of the central US by 2000. And within the next couple of years, certainly by 2004, you had folks on every continent, multiple different networks. Today I think you have thousands, possibly tens of thousands of these kinds of networks using different forms of a lot of the open source technology. And today this is sort of the preeminent gathering for folks in the space. Now, this would have continued to mosey along. We were slowly building, as hobbyists, creating these technologies. But in 2010, the United States Department of State, the Department of State for the United States, and it still blows my mind, made a multi-million-dollar investment in our work. And their goal, the United States State Department's goal, was to serve communications into places where human rights workers, where democracy advocates, and et cetera, were under stress. In essence, working under the most repressive regimes on the planet. And for us, the goal was like, oh, you're going to give us a whole bunch of money to create these truly disruptive, anti-censorship, community-empowering technologies. We'll take it. And this changed the dynamic radically in terms of what became possible. All of a sudden, for the first time, not only could we create a core team of people in-house that were working full-time, day in and day out, on these technologies, but we could actually pass funding to all of these different groups all around the globe, 8 to 10 different groups. Each were developing certain facets of these technologies that we felt were kind of best of breed. And what we would do, internal to the Open Technology Institute on the Commotion project, was sort of create the framework whereby each of these different modules could be put together and swapped out and made usable, which was a radical departure from almost all prior mesh wireless technologies in these spaces. So the New York Times ran a story on our work and dubbed this thing the Internet in a Suitcase. And this became, for us, really funny, especially when the head of Iranian intelligence came out publicly and said, we know about, those imperialistic bastards, the Americans, and exactly what they're trying to do to overthrow our regime, and we've developed countermeasures for the internet in a suitcase. Now, of course, there is actually no suitcase, right? This is all software. It's bits, not atoms. So we're like, I wonder what they're doing. Like, they're probably sitting around trying to figure out how do we stop suitcases from entering Iran. And the New York Times took a picture of a bunch of equipment. They told us, look, what we really want to do is take a picture of this product. And we're like, well, the product is software. And they're like, well, that's kind of sucky for a picture. So what can you do? And we're like, well, maybe we can take like a bunch of equipment and throw it into a briefcase. And they're like, that's great. So we literally went all around our office and just picked up whatever was lying around in our office and stuck it into a Pelican case, which they took a picture of. And one of those products that we'd grabbed was a prototype. There were 7 of them on the planet from a company that was petitioning the FCC on a bunch of spectrum stuff. And so all of the devices that were in there were just kind of off-the-shelf widgets that could be easily identified. And then there was this one literal black box device that was in this. And we started seeing postings online of people that were sort of putting out like, the picture from the New York Times and identifying like what all the devices were, and then, the line that goes to the black box with a big question mark. And I want to believe that somewhere in Iran there was like a group of engineers convened to identify the device that was in the internet in a suitcase. So I think this may be the first time I've told that part of the story. So all you Iranians out there can stand down. There's absolutely nothing to that. But what it is, in fact, is this cross-platform, multi-OS software package. And since 2010, the United States State Department, and Radio Free Asia's Open Technology Fund, Ford Foundation, Knight Foundation, Open Society Foundations have all put funding into this project. And so now it's sort of this multi-million-dollar open source tech development project, ostensibly to create technologies that are only going to be used, of course, outside of the United States. And because we want people to be able to use these technologies, we're not stopping with just the software development. We're actually creating a whole variety of different resources for use all around the globe that are being translated as we speak. In fact, while I was getting ready to come here, lots of energy from a group of folks, which I'm really excited for, to translate all of this into Portuguese so that folks here can start building their own Commotion networks, which should be a lot of fun, and I'm hoping that we will get that started now, actually. And this digital literacy platform for us is crucial. What we've done an incredibly poor job as an open source community of doing is making these technologies accessible to the non-geeks in the world, the other 99.9% of humanity. So we've built a number of test beds in a large number of different locations, spanning Somaliland, Tunisia, Dharamsala, India, and then a bunch in the United States. You can see there's a question mark over Cuba, and that's because we are working now to figure out what it is that we're actually going to do there. But I want to talk about 2 quick stories I think are really indicative of how we work. So in Red Hook in New York, we'd built a testbed network to play around with the software in community to get feedback and figure out what breaks and what doesn't work and how quickly people can build these kinds of things. And in Red Hook, we built this network right before Superstorm Sandy hit, one of these big, not a hurricane, just a god-awful lot of wind and rain kind of storm, and completely flooded out large portions of New York City. And the only network that stayed up, all of the telco stuff went down, all of the, it was just a disaster in the poorer communities in New York, but our network stayed up. And so at one point, the FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management, I think, agency, was getting their connectivity and spreading it throughout the community using this test bed network. And so it became this kind of sad but serendipitous moment where we got to test the technology in emergency response during a natural disaster in community, where the people that had to maintain that network were the local folks that had learned about the technology only weeks and months prior. And the second one was this network in Dharamsala in India, where we had done a weekend sort of test of the training materials. And we're now seeing multiple different networks kind of metastasize out from that. People took this back to their communities and started building small-scale networks interconnecting, mainly around schools right now, that we keep learning about. Because we don't track our users, obviously, for obvious reasons. We're only sort of learning about all of these implementations that are happening all around the globe as we speak. But for me, what's really exciting is not the internet connectivity sharing part of this, but it's the ability to create a local communications network in places that may or may not have any internet connectivity whatsoever. And I call this kind of the Tahrir Square use case. Right before Mubarak turned off internet in Egypt, I had been asked to come to the State Department and talk about sort of what we saw happening in these spaces. And it was an interesting conversation because the core of my conversation was about that it's only a matter of time before somebody shuts off the internet, and that we need to be developing the technologies to make that possible. And it was maybe a month later that that exact scenario played out. I'm pretty sure that's why the State Department decided to fund our work, because they invited me back in and they were like, okay, that crazy thing you said a month ago, explain that to us, because that seems to be exactly what happened. And now it's part of kind of the dictator playbook, right? Like one of the first things you're going to do is try to figure out how to control communications. And if you can't do that, you're going to look to turn off those communications. Not that that's necessarily effective. It wasn't effective for Mubarak. It wasn't effective for Gaddafi. It certainly wasn't effective in Turkey. By shutting off Twitter, they doubled the number of Twitter users in Turkey in a matter of a couple of weeks, which is an impressive clusterfuck that they brought down upon their heads. And we've been building these kind of what we call pop-up networks to demonstrate how quickly and easily these things can be built. So number of devices are the backbone devices, number of builders are the people that are doing this. You can see in the Allied Media Conference, we had 5 folks that were kind of actually trained, and then we had 10 people that had never received training on this before, to see if we could, in a matter of a few hours, interconnect. That became actually a campus. Similar space, I guess, to this, except spread out over, I think it was 4 or 5 different buildings that all had to be linked together. And as you can see, it's like 3 to 6 hours to build a network that can serve hundreds to several thousand people. And then, of course, the last one there, the Internet Summit and the International Summit for Community Wireless Networks. If anyone here does anyone know about Seabase in Berlin? This is like, to me, it's like the quintessential nerd bunker. There's this great hackerspace there. It's been around for quite a while. And it's like everything you think about when you think about the stereotypical hackerspace. And we set up a network there during that summit, which drew interest from a lot of the folks that were there. And so I feel that was the one where we got put through the paces. Our network definitely got taken down a few times over the course of the days that we were there. And at the Allied Media Conference, as you can see from this, we had sort of internet access as one service or application on this, but then also kind of this local suite of applications and services that were on that system. And this ended up including a variety of different things on this. We had sort of a mechanism whereby we could actually push out different services and applications. And this is what was developed over the course of that weekend. So you had sort of a Twitter system that was on there. You had a bunch of social networking stuff. You had maps that were being put on there and session notes. We even had somebody that did streaming of some of the sessions inside the conference to folks that were in other places in the conference. And at that summit, this international summit, we had people from all around the globe that then took these technologies back with them. Now, in Tunisia, we did sort of a more permanent implementation of Commotion. This was over the course of about a 4-day workshop. We created a network that spanned about 70% of the town of Sayada. It's about 12 to 15,000 residents, 4 days, and is now covered by this Commotion mesh. And there, the portal for Commotion contains everything from a portal to the town government and all the civic information that's on there, but also like in full copies of Wikipedia in French and Arabic, an electronic lending library of some about, I think it's 2,500 books and works of various sorts, local maps, chat rooms, and what's just popped up, we now know, is there's a streaming radio station that's now joined that network, which is pretty cool. And we've documented a lot of that. We've put out a case study on what happened in Seattle. But we figure, like, if you can in 4 days network a good-sized town, and if that network is now owned, operated, run by that local community, that's a pretty successful implementation strategy. Now, what we've seen is the milestones of this project, and you can see this rapid increase in check-ins of this system over time. Mirror, in many ways, like what we've seen. Let me see if I can get this to work. There we go. And what this is a visualization of the GitHub repository, where each of those things flying around is a whole project team. And what you see is, again, this massive growth in the feature sets and the functionality of these technologies over just a 3-year period. And to me, what this is demonstrating is that beginning of J-curve growth, of uptake, right? I won't say this is a breakout technology yet, but what we're seeing is a massive number of open source developers beginning to come on board. We're seeing implementation beginning to really take off. And we have only just released the technology publicly. The version 1.0 we released at the end of last year. And if you look at what the project teams have been doing, this growth from a single project team 3 years ago to, I think we're up to 15 or 20 different components of that right now. This is pretty explosive growth in a pretty short period of time. And the idea of bringing this kind of affordable communications systems that are pennies on the dollar what people have to pay now, not just because we are sharing internet connectivity, but because you can put all these services and applications onto this local area network in a way that was not possible before, is radically new. Let me see. Oh wow, it's just going to keep doing that, huh? Okay. So fundamentally, this software that we're building is about connecting people directly to one another. It's about using wireless devices that are already on the ground, that people already own or can get their hands on. And it's about sort of creating this labor of love that is untempered by political pragmatics. I feel like it's for the dreamers, it's for the idealists, it's for optimists and visionaries, it's for people that want to build something in their local community that simply hasn't existed before. It's following a business model that you will never get from the major telcos, right? You will never see this kind of functionality delivered by the telecom incumbents. Because it's lower cost and because it's beneficial to you doesn't necessarily mean it maximizes their profits. And what we've done is we've built something that scales now. We've clearly done locally, we've clearly done throughout like neighborhoods, we've done now across entire communities. What I'm now interested in is how much further can this thing actually be scaled up? Can we get to multiple different communities throughout a region interconnecting with one another? Can we think about ways that this can be interconnected? Whoa, what happened there? Firefox crashed. All right, well, so that's fine because I'm towards the end of this. So after 14 years of development, we've released this Commotion 1.0. We've got 1.1, release candidate 1, that's pending release right now. It'll probably be public within the next few days. Anyone that wants to can actually download that as we speak and start using it. You go to commotionwireless.net is the project page. And I think what we're seeing is with all of this rapid increase, this uptake, development, etc., is that this is a technology that is quite certain to meaningfully impact things. I don't know that the future will be all commotion all the time, but it's definitely going to impact how we think about the future of telecommunications and how we think about the future of community networking. So with that, I'm going to stop, open it up for a few questions. I think we have time for that. And I'd be also happy to talk more with folks after this, and also to, I hope, be talking with folks about how we can get some Commotion networks built and implemented here in Brazil as well. So thank you very much. I'm waiting for a brave soul to step forward and have all your questions answered. Yes.
So, in order to build these cross-community networks, would you necessarily need your own infrastructure, or you could leverage some other sort of infrastructure?
Yeah, so one can definitely VPN between them. There was a project that a number of community wireless networks had been engaged in called the Intercity VPN network, which in essence was tunneling through existing infrastructure. I'm interested in that, but I'm also interested in if we can, using things like GNU Radio and some of the USRP boards from Edis Research or other similar kind of equipment, if we couldn't do long distance wireless links that are autonomous from existing infrastructure. I think we've already done several cross-border systems, and some of them are quite large. If you look at like what GuiFiNet, GUIFI.net has done, if you look at what groups like Funkfoya and Freifunk, Freifunk, have done a lot of long distance, 30 to 50 kilometer links at a time. If we could get some lower frequency spectrum, and this is what a lot of the battles I'm fighting right now over what's called the television white spaces. If we could get television frequencies that are unused to be repurposed into things like community networking, you could go quite a long distance with those and actually achieve this kind of city-to-city interconnections without much of a problem at all. And that, I think, would be truly revolutionary, and is one of the big battles that we're fighting for right now in Washington, D.C. Yeah. Any other questions? I'm happy to stick around afterwards then and also answer questions more privately. So thank you very much. Really appreciate it.